Welcome to Cameron and Miliband Live, the battle for number 10. Good evening. Tonight sees the first big election test for two men, one of whom will be the UK's next Prime Minister. David Cameron and Ed Miliband are the only people with a genuine chance of forming the next government. Tonight, we'll see what they're made of.
Over the next 90 minutes, both men will face Jeremy head-to-head, and they'll also answer the questions of our studio audience. Running quickly through the order of play, David Cameron will be interviewed by Jeremy, then join me to take questions from our audience. After that, Ed Miliband will face questions from the studio, and we finish with his head-to-head with Jeremy. So, let's get to it. The election starts here and now. First up, the Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party, David Cameron.
David Cameron, do you know how many food banks there were in this country when you came to power?
I don't have the exact figures, but I know that usage of food banks has gone up, and there are many amazing volunteers who man those food banks and provide an important service.
There were 66 when you came to power. There are now 421. 900,000 people took food parcels last year, free food parcels. You talked about broken Britain and fixing it. You haven't. It's more broken now than it was.
Well, I don't accept that, because if you look at what's happened with our economy, there are 1.89 million more people in work than when I became Prime Minister. We've got 900,000 fewer people on out-of-work benefits.
Is an increase in food banks a mark of success?
Look, obviously there has been an increase in food bank use. That's partly because of the difficulties we faced as a country. It's also, Jeremy, because we changed the rules. The previous government didn't allow job centres to advertise the existence of food banks. They thought it would be bad PR. I thought that was a wrong decision. I thought it was a poor decision. So we allowed them to point people towards food banks if they needed them. But look, the big picture is we want to get more people back to work. We've turned the economy around, and it's jobs that are the best route out of poverty.
Is it acceptable in a rich country like ours that there are that number of people depending on free food aid?
Well, obviously, I want fewer people to be using food banks, and I want more people to have the security of a job. But we have created 1,000 jobs for every day this government's been in office. Now, that's a statistic, but behind that statistic are people who are able to provide for their families, who are earning a wage, who are able to build a better life.
How many of those jobs are zero-hours contracts?
About 1 in 50 jobs are zero-hours contracts. Yeah. So this is an important point.
Could you live on a zero-hours contract?
No. Some people choose a zero-hours contract, for instance, students, because they want the flexibility. But what we did is, well, hold on a second, we outlawed, first government to do this, the idea of exclusive zero-hours contracts where you can only work for one business. So we passed a law saying that shouldn't happen. But it is a myth, as some people want to say. The jobs that have been created are all low-paid jobs. That's not true.
No one's saying that.
Well,
I'm not saying
that. But the hint you're trying to give is that
I'm saying there are 700,000 people on zero-hours contracts. Could you live on one?
No, look, as I said,
Could
some
you
people...
live on one?
Well, I want to create a country where more people have the opportunity of the full-time work that they want.
Could you live on a zero-hours contract?
Well, look, that's not the question. The question is...
Well, it's the question I'm asking.
Well, yeah, look, but the point is some people choose a zero-hours contract. If you're a student, for instance, and you want to do some part-time work, a zero-hours contract can work for you. That's why we haven't outlawed them altogether. What we've outlawed is exclusive zero-hours contracts. And no, I couldn't live on one of those, and that's why we outlawed them.
But the person, for example, a colleague of mine this morning spoke to a man in the northeast, Patrick. He walks 4 hours to and from work. When he gets there, he doesn't know whether he's on for 1 hour or 2 hours, or if he's lucky, longer, and then he has to walk home again. He gets £6.75 an hour. He works between 8 and 12 hours a week on average. Now, is that any way to live?
No, I want more people to have part-time, not have part-time work, to have full-time work, and that is what's happening in our economy. Look, it has been difficult. We've had a very difficult few years following the longest and deepest recession virtually in our country's history. Now, we're coming out of that. We created 1.89 million new jobs. That's 1,000 a day. The majority of those have been full-time jobs, not part-time jobs. Most of them have been in relatively well-paid occupations. Only 1 in 50 jobs is a 0-hours contract, and some people choose those contracts. But if you're asking me, do I want more people to have the dignity and security of work and a regular wage? Yes. Do I want a higher minimum wage? Yes. And we've seen the minimum wage increase now above inflation for the first time in many years. And I want to see that minimum wage go through £7, on to £8. And crucially, Jeremy, in terms of what the government can do, we have cut taxes. So we've taken the 3 million lowest paid people in our country out of income tax altogether. So you can earn now £10,600 before you start paying income tax at all. And I think that is vitally important,
Sure.
And that's been the priority for the government.
So you couldn't live on a 0-hours contract. And this is one of the things people really find problematic about you. I'm going to be personal, if I may, for a second.
You can.
It is that you would choose, for example, to appoint a man who oversaw tax avoidance as a minister in your government, another rich person. That you would choose to appoint to the heart of government a rich newspaper editor whose newspaper hacked people's phones. That you choose to defend a rich television presenter who thumps a colleague. Now, what do you have in common with all these very rich people?
Let's take these in turn, because let's take this in turn, because I think that is completely unjustified. Let's take Stephen Green, who was head of HSBC. He had been appointed by my predecessor, Gordon Brown, to run his Business Advisory Council. I appointed him as a trade minister in a move that was welcomed across the political spectrum, across British industry, as someone who had run a bank responsibly. Now, I don't know whether there was wrongdoing subsequently at HSBC. We'll have to see. But nobody criticised that appointment at the time.
Did you ask him about it?
I didn't ask him about that specific question, but we went through all the normal processes and procedures that you would with appointing a minister, proper checks, including checks by the Inland Revenue into someone's tax affairs, and so it was properly dealt with. Now, if you want to raise the issue of Jeremy Clarkson, I said very clearly I didn't know what had happened, and so I wasn't going to comment extensively. I just simply answered a question I was asked, explaining he was a friend of mine, he's a talent, and I hope it could be resolved. But I'm absolutely clear, look, treating the people you work with badly is not acceptable. The BBC have made their decision, and that's absolutely right for them. So I think the aspersion you're trying to cast, I think, is completely ridiculous. What I have done for the last 5 years is lead a government that has got the economy growing, has got people back to work, has cut the taxes of the poorest people in our country. I'm not saying we've achieved everything we've set out to do, but the country is immeasurably stronger.
Let's come to the question of the economy then. Apart from broken Britain, one of your slogans last time was that the country was overwhelmed in debt. Overwhelmed was the word you used. How much money have you borrowed?
Well, we have cut the budget deficit in half as a share of GDP.
How much money have you borrowed?
Well, look, the key thing is the amount of money you borrow every year, the deficit.
Do you know what it is?
That is down in half. I know that we have borrowed a lot of money because the deficit adds to your debt every year.
Do you know what the figure is?
Well, you're going to tell me, Jeremy, presumably.
I am. It's a mere £500 billion.
Well, that is a lot less than the previous government was borrowing. Because
no, it isn't. It's more than the previous government borrowed.
The annual overdraft, the deficit, has come down by 1/2 as a share of GDP, and the total stock, the debt as a share of our national income is now falling. Now, we haven't finished the job. We have been working to a plan, and the British people have been working incredibly hard to that plan of turning the economy around, getting the deficit down, having public services that we can afford, and creating jobs and livelihoods for all our people. That is what we have been doing. Now, if you're saying we haven't gone fast enough to cut the deficit, I would agree we need to complete the job. But all my political opponents have been saying we should borrow more, we should spend more, we should tax more. That's the alternative that you face with Ed Miliband and his approach.